Hey everybody, and welcome to another hand review. Today we're going to look at two hands played from the 2024 WSOP Main Event, where Kristen Foxen made some extremely creative moves that prompted a lot of discussion on social media and poker forums. Now, I assume most of you already know about Kristen's accomplishments, but just as a brief recap, she's amassed 4 WSOP bracelets, sits second on women's all-time money list behind Vanessa Selps, and is closing in on $10 million in live tournament earnings. In my mind, calling her one of the world's best female players doesn't really do her justice, as she's simply one of the best players, period. This first hand we'll look at is a great example of what a unique poker mind she has. Here she is on day 6 of the WSOP Main Event, navigating a hand with pocket kings.
Yeah, I definitely think that some of these online players probably will just have bigger pieces of themselves.
Niklas Astedt, who is Lena 900 online, absolute crusher in online tournaments and live tournaments as well. He opens in middle position with ace-jack. Kristen has king-king on the button, and she decides to just call. This may seem unusual to some of you, but if you'll notice, the blinds are very short here. And so when you have short stacks in the blinds, sometimes you want to slow play, like here with kings, hoping that one of them shoves, and Lena, with his ace-jack offsuit here, decides to go with it, thinking the blinds are shoving with ace-5 suited, pocket fives, and so on and so forth, and then Kristen can get in a really, really great spot and a huge pot with a big advantage with kings. So I like her just call here. She calls, and Tyler Montoya in the big blind calls with ace-jack offsuit as well.
900,000 in the middle, Foxen with kings against ace-jack, ace-jack. Oh my, Oof. And an ace in the kitchen.
Yeah, and Chrissy's not going to like that. Like, I very much like the fact that she did take the flatting line there with some shorter stacks behind her who might have elected to squeeze. But now, obviously, her hand very much under-repped here, but is not going to like the ace against Astedt's early position raise. Just going to come with the overcall, so...
The flop is ace 7-6 with 2 hearts. The ace of hearts is on the board, and Kristen holds the king of hearts, which may become relevant. Astedt c-bets $200,000 into the $900,000 pot. Kristen with kings, which have shriveled up a bit on this ace-high flop, still enough of a hand to call with. She makes the call. Montoya has an interesting spot here with ace-jack. The pot is getting so big now compared to his stack, he might just want to get this in and end the hand. I think he has a very tough decision between just calling and raising either all in or raising to a smaller amount, looking to get all in with his ace-jack. But in the end, he decides to just call.
Interesting card.
Very, very interesting. Both Montoya and Foxen with a heart. Foxen with the king of hearts, though. And Astedt also, of course, can't love the overcall by Montoya in that spot. So is going to check, gets checked around.
The 5 of hearts rolls off on the turn, bringing a flush, giving Kristen a nut flush draw, and it gets checked around. I like her non-bet here. Her hand is a little bit too good to turn into a bluff. She's happy to just see a river, find out if she makes her flush or hits a king and wants to put a lot of money in, or wants to play a small pot and or get out of the way. Standard check all around. I think if Astedt had Montoya's hand, or rather if Montoya were in late position, he might want to bet this turn and just get his money in with ace-jack with the jack of hearts. But being out of position, standard check. The standard checks all around.
Now the river pairs the 6, and Montoya going to have a lot more 6Xs than the pre-flop raiser and the flatter in this spot. But can Astedt find some value here? Again, putting Chrissy probably on 8s, 9s, 10s. Blocking the nut flush, but she did check back the turn. Does she very often check back the turn there?
She's going the other
with
route.
The nut flush. Yeah, it looks like what I thought could have been something that she was considering, which is raising right now against that sizing.
The 6 of diamonds rolls off on the river, and here's where things get very interesting. Montoya checks, which I like. I think he could consider a small value bet here, but he's often going to be beat by an ace-king, ace-queen. from Astedt, it's hard to get a ton of value in this three-way pot. Astedt, now having seen the check from Montoya, decides to bet 200,000 into a pot of 1.5 million. So this is a very small bet. It's designed to get called by, a random ace X from Montoya or from Kristen. It's also in part designed to avoid facing a big bet from Kristen if he were to check to her. But most of all, people use these block bets sometimes incorrectly to just avoid facing big bets. That's not the main purpose. The main purpose is they have to be value bets. Astedt obviously knows this and is using it correctly. I might have gone slightly bigger. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. He's a better tournament player than I am. And Kristen has a decision. So with pocket kings, with the king of hearts, I don't think she has good blockers to call here. Yes, she blocks some ace-king combos, but realistically, Astedt is repping that he has an ace. He's repping that he has a hand like he has. Obviously, he'll have some bluffs. He's a strong player who's capable of bluffing, which if you watch this main event, you know. But he's saying that he has a hand like ace X of some kind, probably a strongish ace, which is what he has exactly. Kristen decides she doesn't want to call here, which I think is right. She's got a player behind her to worry about too. But she does see her king of hearts blocker and thinks to herself, maybe this is a good opportunity to bluff raise. What I find most interesting is that she, in a sense, raises to somewhat represent the flush. She doesn't have a pair blocker, and she doesn't raise that big. She goes ahead and raises to 1.3 million here, which if she had a full house, she could raise a bit bigger. Doesn't mean she would, but she could. She's kind of repping with this sizing that she has a straight or a flush, and potentially even, all the way down to the weak flushes. What I find most interesting about that is those hands were straights and flushes on the turn. Now, yes, it's very likely that some straights would have checked back, but would she check back a flush? Now, what I find so interesting about this is that you'll find some players who never check back flushes, but you'll find other players who do check back flushes, but never try to represent that they check back a flush with a bluff. And I think this type of player is much more common. Now, Astedt and Foxen know each other, they respect each other, and so maybe these mind games aren't so much in play, but truth be told, I think they are. Even when I'm playing against a really strong player, I do make reads such as, okay, this person would probably check back some flushes, but probably wouldn't try to rep it, would rarely try to rep it. And so I might fold in a spot like this because of a read like that, for example. So I find it really interesting that she decides to go for the bluff here, representing mostly a strong check back hand, although she, of course, could have a hand like 6-6, 7-7, ace-6 suited, 7-6 suited, something like that. She goes ahead and raises, and let's see what her two opponents with ace-jack decide to do.
This is a brilliant play by Kristen Foxen. I think it's going to get through the first of the ace-jacks based on Montoya's body language.
Yeah, but all of this talk, I think, by Montoya, while there's still action pending, is not good poker etiquette,
Correct.
Montoya blocking some of the flushes, though, with the jack of hearts, right? Like the king jack of hearts, the jack 10 of hearts.
Yeah. One muck.
Queen jack of hearts.
So Montoya is first act, and he has the jack of hearts here. So the jack of hearts is blocking some flushes. The pot is also pretty big here, but he's facing a bet and a raise. And not only is Kristen representing a hand better than ace-jack, but Astedt could very easily have been betting small as a trap to reopen the action. So betting small with a hand like ace-ace, betting small with a hand like a nut flush, or 7-7, or what have you. So not only does Montoya have to worry about Foxen, he has to worry about Astedt as well. I think it's wise to get out of the way here, although we can see that he has a chop for the best hand, and had he called, Astedt would have folded and he would have won the pot. I like this fold. Easy to look back at a hand like this and beat yourself up, but I think it's a good fold.
Astedt knows Foxen is capable. She's really trying to win this pot, trying to get these types of hands to fold out here with this raise against a very small sizing.
So now it's back to Astedt, who has the same hand, doesn't have a player behind him to worry about, but doesn't have a heart as well. And he's going through the mental gymnastics that I was talking about earlier. Would Kristen check back a flush on the turn? Would she try to rep that she check back a flush on the turn? Would she play a straight this way? Yeah, probably. That makes sense. Does she have some full houses? Yeah, that makes sense. What bluffs does she have? Would she bluff with a hand like pocket eights with the 8 of hearts? Yeah, maybe, probably. He's not thinking a lot about kings and queens, I would guess. I don't really know, because a lot of those 3-bet, as we can see, she has kings with the king of hearts. I could think of some value that she would definitely play this way, being 7-7, 9-8. And by definitely, I mean that she would check back the turn and raise the river. I don't know what she would do on the flop or preflop necessarily. She might 3-bet 9-8 suited preflop. She might raise the flop with 7-7, but the turn and river makes sense for those hands. And so then it's figuring out the bluffs that make sense. And those are a little bit harder to come by. Some really natural bluffing hands here would be a hand like 8-7 with the 8 of hearts and the 7 of spades, but those don't play preflop, so she can't have those. So really a lot of her bluffs are going to have to come from single heart pocket pairs. If I'm him, I'm thinking and struggling to come up with the bluff combos that make sense, which is part of what makes this bluff so great.
A head shake.
If Astedt had the ace-jack of hearts, I think he might find the call having a blocker to a lot of the likely flats, the suited broadways. But again, knowing that Kristen is very capable and questioning the line, right? Does she check back multi-way, with a flush there?
Oh my, she got them both to fold, the best hands.
Thanks.
Astedt makes the fold. I probably would have folded as well. And Kristen takes down a very, very nice pot. Now, the second hand was probably the most talked about hand of the summer. And it's easy to see why. It starts rather innocently. Joe Siroc opens at 2.4 million from under the gun. And Chrissy calls in the big blind with king-queen offsuit. There are 13 left in the main event at this point. Things are really getting down to it. Every pot matters. They head to the flop of ace-king-jack. Chrissy checks, which she's going to do with her full range. Siroc bets 4 million, which is a little bit on the larger side, but this is a board that heavily favors his range. I would have bet smaller in his shoes, both with my range and especially with a hand like ace-king that really wants to keep in a hand like king-9 that's essentially drawing dead. But he decides to bet bigger. He's a great player. Who might have questioned it? And Chrissy with king-queen has a very easy call.
Just a pair of kings for Kristen.
Siroc sizing up Foxen stack. Going to continue barreling. Going to be queen X, 10X, hearts in there. Obviously some of the inferior pair holdings. Top pair, second pair, pair straight draws. This is the board texture that you will expect the under the gun opener to be pretty aggressive on.
That's pretty aggressive.
They head to the 5 of spades turn, which brings 2 flush draws. Now Chrissy checks again, relatively standard. Siroc fires out another big bet of 11.6 million. And this is where things get very interesting. Most players in this spot, and myself included, would be thinking, okay, does he have enough bluffs for me to call here? I have a king, I beat bluffs. I have the queen for additional equity to improve to a straight if I am up against ace, king, or a set. We're deep in the main event. This really threatens my stack. If I call here, I might face an all-in on the river, which I'm not comfortable calling with king, queen. And so I might lose a really big chunk of my stack here. It's very uncomfortable, and this is where kind of leverage in tournaments, especially as you get down to it, and especially when you're up against a bigger stack or you are a bigger stack, leverage becomes so key. So this is a spot where I think a lot of players would fold, and I myself would be inclined to fold unless I had some kind of read on Siroc. But if I didn't fold, I'd be calling. Christy does neither of these things. She decides to shove her stack in, 37 million, her tournament life with 13 players left in the World Series of Poker main event.
He had Astedt to his left. She's going
She
all
says
in.
all in.
The fact that she is willing to do this, where 999 out of 1,000 players would not consider it, shows you one of the things that sets her apart. As the saying sort of goes, I don't know exactly, you have to be willing to die in order to live. And in tournament poker, especially in these big tournaments, in the situations where you really get down to it on these big stages where each hand matters so much, it's all the more true. You are going to run over people who are not willing to put their chips at risk. And if you are willing to put your chips at risk, you get to fight back against people doing the same thing. And you just get to accumulate and accumulate, pushing other people out of the way. Let's get into the analysis. So I think in theory, this hand doesn't make great sense as a shove only because it's too low equity. There are 2 flush draws present on the board, so, a hand like ace deuce of spades, jack 10 of hearts, or jack 9 of hearts even, these are hands that have more equity that when you do shove, if you are called, you at least have 9 outs or more to improve. In this case, we can see Chrissy has 4 outs to improve if she's called. And, sometimes she's going to be up against queen 10 and be drawing essentially dead with 3 outs to the chop. Usually you'd want a stronger draw than this. Well, I know that Chrissy knows that. And so what that tells me is that Chrissy's making an exploitative adjustment here to the fact that she expects, what I would assume is, too wide of a betting range from Joe Rock. She assumes that he's trying to push her around with a much more bluff-heavy range than he otherwise should have. She also might assume that he's trying to make his life easier, making the hand easier to play with a hand like ace 9 or ace 10 that just wants to fire out these big bets, kind of end the hand and then not put any more money in on the river. But then those hands would fold to the shove, which I'm sure that they would. So this is a very big read from Chrissy in a spot where very, very few players, and I'm talking top players, would have the guts to trust their read. Now, in a lot of these hands, we like to hand read and break down from flop play to turn play to river play, including preflop play, what types of hands the opponent can have. And the thing is here with C-Rock, he's raised, which he does with a bunch of hands. He c-bet the flop and he c-bet the turn. He hasn't taken as many range-defining actions. I call range-defining actions things like check calling, where he's not going to check call this flop with 6-4 of spades, but he might c-bet it with 6-4 of spades. So because he's just been doing the betting, we can't do very precise hand reading, and it just comes down to what Kristen thinks about how aggressively he is playing this spot, how much he is over-bluffing, if at all. And if he's over-bluffing enough, and if he's making enough protection bets with hands like ace 9, ace 10, that are then going to fold, then this play becomes good. But wow, it is risky.
He had Astedt to his left. She's going
She
all
says
in.
all in.
Now the action's back on Joe. He has ace-king, which is a really strong hand. He would have been comfortable to value bet all the brick rivers, potentially probably all in. But now that he's facing the turn raise, he has to ask himself 2 questions. 1, do I beat any value? 2, how often is she bluffing? I think he doesn't beat any value at this point. Some players would shove here with ace-jack, and she's basically never going to have ace-king. She would have 3-bet pre-flop, I think, almost always. And if not, I mean, yeah, maybe there's some fringe combos that he chops with, but those are very rare. I think she's mostly representing a hand like a slow play jack-jack pre-flop. It's mostly a hand like queen 10 more than anything else. Queen 10 is basically 90% of her value range here because she's not going to check call with 5-5 on the flop, and aces and kings usually are going to 3-bet pre-flop jacks sometimes. So I think she's repping jack-jack and queen 10. But if I'm in his shoes, I'm thinking I'm either up against a semi-bluff or I'm beat. So now we have to think about the semi-bluffs. Ace-X of spades, King-X of spades, and Jack-X of hearts. Those are the hands that make sense to me. Maybe some Queen 9 of hearts type hands, possibly Queen 9 of spades that made a loose call on the flop. But I think what it comes down to is, like I was saying earlier, most players don't have the will to make this shove, even with some hands like ace 4 of spades, even with king queen of spades or king 10 of spades here. Now, if he's up against jack-jack or queen 10, he does have 6 outs. That's around 12-13% to improve. He does have some equity in the pot, even when he's beat. He's not going to be up against ace-ace and king-king, really, which have him drawing dead or near dead. So he does have that safety net to fall back on. He's getting a little better than 2-to-1 pot odds. He needs to be good maybe 30% of the time, or needs to win maybe 30% of the time to make the call. So that 13% worst case, it does help a little bit and make it such that you don't need to be ahead. Certainly you don't need to be ahead more often than not to make this call.
His left. She's going
She
all
says
in.
all in. And a call.
Oh,
She's
my
not
goodness.
going to like
I need a
getting
10.
called.
Oh, my goodness. Foxen looking for a 10 and a 10 only.
Ace, king, queen, king, all in turn.
I have a shot.
Big pot poker.
In the end, C-Rock, I guess, flips a coin in his head and decides to make this call. And he's only got to fade 4 outs to take down this really, really big pot.
Well, this is her biggest misstep of the last several days. And now she needs to be bailed out by a 4-outer.
She's been there before. She's been there 24 hours ago. And she needed an ace. Now she needs a 10 on the finale and does not get it. Kristen Foxen eliminated.
The 6 of hearts doesn't improve Kristen's hand, and she is out in 13th place. Joe Siroc chips up to 132 million. This is a massive stack at this point. Even at this late stage in the tournament, he's got close to 3 times average, not quite, but almost, and is in really good position to make a very, very deep run into the final table. Despite the fact that Foxen lost this hand, and as I hinted at earlier, got a lot of criticism on social media, on poker forums for the play, as you're going to get when you're playing on a big stage, no matter what you do. I think that this shows so much strength as a poker player, especially a tournament player. And if I were to see somebody who I was looking to invest in make a play like this, it would make me much more confident in them. Because as I mentioned, what it takes to win a tournament is a willingness to die. And the bravery to go for huge plays and to trust your gut, trust your read. Sometimes your gut is going to be wrong. Now, in this case, either Kristen's gut was wrong or she was right about Siroc's range, but she just ran into the part of it she didn't want to run into. I would not want to be up against somebody who is willing to make this kind of play because it makes your life so difficult when you're playing against them. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and I will see you in a future video. Until then, take care and good luck.